All right, y'all, hear me out. Daniel Jackson could actually finish as a Gopher all-time great in the wide receiver room. I'm going to tell you why and why he is a great potential NFL prospect for a later draft round pick for the Golden Gophers on today's show.
You are Locked On Golden Gophers, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Gopher fans? You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And we are breaking down each and every one of the Gophers position groups up until game week, which is next week. Now, we're going to be flying through these, making sure we're breaking down every single group and talking about the potential depth chart for 2024. Today, we're talking about the Gophers wide receiver room, which is definitely one of the biggest question marks on the season, especially from an offensive perspective. Now, today, we're going to talk about Daniel Jackson as a whole and him as an NFL prospect and how he could maybe be a record-setting Gopher. Then we're going to talk about the depth chart potentially for the Golden Gophers. And it's a very interesting room, a very diverse and widespread room. And I think we're going to get a lot of answers in this room moving forward beyond 2024 this season. And then we're going to rank every single wide receiver room in the Big Ten from 1 to 18. So be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of your daily Gophers content moving forward. Now, tomorrow, we're going to get into the tight ends, and then we're going to get into the offensive line. So those are the next 2 days of shows. You're definitely going to tap in for those, and be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube so you don't miss any of that daily Gophers goodness. Now, on top of that, be sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast so others can find the show. But let's dive in. Let's talk wide receivers for your Minnesota Golden Gophers, including Daniel Jackson. We're kicking it off with him because I think Daniel Jackson could be a solid NFL prospect. Now, when you look at last year's NFL guys coming from the Big Ten, you saw Marvin Harrison Jr. get drafted in the first round, of course, but then you saw Isaiah Williams go undrafted. Now, Isaiah Williams is making some huge noise in the NFL preseason with the Detroit Lions, going to show he should have probably found a draft opportunity in this NFL draft, and he was the second most productive receiver in the entire Big Ten last year, which goes to show that Daniel Jackson was the third or fourth, depending on the category you're looking at, most productive receiver in the Big Ten last year. And if he can improve on those numbers, I think he should absolutely be in the conversation for a wide receiver option that could go day 3 or maybe even sneak his way into day 2. But I think the most likely outcome for Daniel Jackson with a really good season could be a day 3 wide receiver, maybe 4th round, 5th round guy that could scrap and fight. Now, we've seen 4th and 5th round guys turn into studs before, so that doesn't mean that Daniel Jackson's ceiling wouldn't be high in the NFL, but it means that he could find an opportunity, hopefully, by getting actually selected in the NFL draft. Now, we've seen Steph Diggs, Tyreek Hill, people of that nature go in the 4th and 5th rounds and what have you. I believe Puka Nacua might have been a 3rd round, but he might have been even later than that. He might have been 6th round. I can't remember. But regardless, we found really productive receivers on day 3, and I think Daniel Jackson can put his name into that conversation. Now, what does Daniel Jackson bring as an NFL prospect? Well, first of all, he is elite. I mean, crisp route running. All you have to do is turn on that Nebraska game from last year and watch the game-winning touchdown with the toe drag swag. But it wasn't even the toe drag swag that was most impressive. It was the break off on his route running in the release package, which gave him the separation to be that open. And actually, if you go back and watch that Nebraska game in full, or even just watch every passing down from the Gophers in that Nebraska game, you'll actually notice that I believe like 2 plays earlier, he also had another opportunity where he separated, had the space, but the ball was placed out of bounds where he couldn't haul it in for the touchdown. Now, luckily, he ended up getting the Michael Jordan in the air toe drag swag touchdown, which is one of my favorite moments of Gophers football all time since I've been watching. I'm not going to lie to you. He has that knowledge on the field. He has that instinct on the field to be able to stay in bounds, keep his body in bounds, stretch his body to the limits to be able to bring in crazy catches. But the biggest thing is the setup with the release package and creating that separation in his route running. I think that is going to be his best trait as an NFL wide receiver, NFL prospect, especially if he continues to build on his numbers. Now, that being said, that is another thing that it should be very enticing to the NFL, especially if he can do it again, is that he has had a production progression and increase every single year, year after year, since he has touched down in Dinkytown. So overall, he has a lot of things that you should like as a wide receiver. He can win in the one-on-one contested balls, but he's really more of a separator. And he has moments where he has those, how did you grab that type of catches? So I think overall, quarterback play has hindered Daniel Jackson at times. Being behind certain receivers, he wasn't always seen as the number one guy. I mean, his freshman year, Rashad Bateman was coming in. It was 2020. It was COVID. It was a weird season to come in, but he wasn't seen as the number one guy. Rashad Bateman was. Then you go to 2021, and we didn't know who was going to be the top guy, but we thought maybe it was going to be Chris Bell due to prior production and what have you. Now, things didn't fully shake out that way, but Daniel Jackson showed progression in 2021 that he could be a guy that could be in the future. Then you go to 2022 and he leads the team in receiving yards. He leads the team in receiving touchdowns, and he was only behind Brevin Spanford in receptions on the team. And he started to come alive in moments. And that season heading into it, actually the fall camp, he was injured. He ended up missing, I believe, the first 2 games or first game and a half before he really got limited reps and then got into the swing of things. I think his first real action was against Michigan State, where he ended up producing really well, and he went on to have a good season. Now you take that and you go to last year, where again, he led the team in receiving yards for back-to-back years, led the team in receiving touchdowns for back-to-back years, and then took over as the receptions leader as well. So he has a ton of great production at every facet of the receiving game. Now he also has decent size metrics at 6 foot 195. I believe maybe he could be a little shorter than 6 foot. He could be like 5'11", 5'10", but I don't think it's a super exaggeration. He could truly be a true 6 foot, and we'll find out at his pro day. But he's on a team that doesn't really pass the ball, but he has found a way to increase his production in every category from year after year. Receptions, you go every year of his career, you go 12 receptions, 22 receptions, 33 receptions, 57 receptions. Yards, you go 167, 248, 557, 831. Touchdowns, you go 0, 1, 5, 8. He has literally taken a step up in every facet, and if he continues on that trend and he gets over 1,000 yards this year and he gets 9 or 10 touchdowns on this season, I'm telling you, Daniel Jackson needs to be a name on NFL radars. Now, he could be playing with the best quarterback he has had thus far in his Gophers career, which could lead to better production, which could lead to that 1,000-yard season. We will see if the team passes more, but regardless, if they find the efficiency and they find their number one separator in Daniel Jackson, then I think he could lead the entire team for a third straight season in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and then in back-to-back seasons in receptions. That is all completely possible, and that's impressive in its own right. But you also could be talking about a Gopher who could be an all-time great, who could be a record-setting Gopher. And I don't think enough people are talking about this and don't give it enough credit. Now, currently, Daniel Jackson sits as the 11th all-time in Gophers receiving yards. And honestly, if we had anyone who could have passed the ball even slightly, like if they could have passed the ball a 3 out of 10 on a 10 scale in the bowl game, he would be sitting at number 10 all time after last season. But the fact that we only passed for like 12 yards, he only needed 30 to get into that 10 slot. So overall, I am really looking forward to Daniel Jackson this year because I think he could possibly put his name into the top three all time in Gophers receiving yards if he can crack that 1,000-yard season. Because if he cracks that 1,000-yard season, he will finish around 3rd or 4th all time, depending on how much above 1,000 he finishes. Because if he gets in with 1,056 yards or more, he will pass Ron Johnson and be the number 3 receiver all time in Gophers history. If he gets 1,273 yards, he will pass Tyler Johnson and be the number 2 Gopher in receiving yards in Gopher history. And if he passes 1,298 receiving yards, then he will pass Eric Decker for the number 1 receiver in receiving yards all time in Gophers history. Now, that isn't blasphemous because that's not even the all-time Gophers record when it comes to receiving yards in a single season. It would be second all-time, and that could be very hard to do, but like I said, could be the best quarterback talent he's playing with. He's been increasing in his production year after year. The offensive line is super strong, so it isn't impossible. Plus, with a harder schedule, they might have to pass the ball more, which means more opportunities for Daniel Jackson. Now, even if he doesn't get into that first, second, third category, if he can get past the 1,000-yard mark, he'll still be top 4 all time, but he also would be one of only 6 other Gophers. So he would be the 7th Gopher to have had a 1,000-yard receiving season. You had 1996 with Ryan Thelwell, 2000 with Ron Johnson, 2008 with Eric Decker, 2018 with Tyler Johnson, and then 2019 with Tyler Johnson again and Rashad Bateman. So if Daniel Jackson adds his name to this list, not only will he finish as an all-time Gopher in the receiving yards category, but I believe he will also get NFL looks from different teams on day 3 and possibly a shot at the Senior Bowl or East-West Shrine Bowl. So overall, Daniel Jackson is a guy I am excited to watch in his final season of the Golden Gophers football. But first things first, we need Daniel Jackson to be healthy. He missed a number of practices in the spring, and now he has missed a few in the fall as well. Now, hopefully it's all precautionary. It's something more minor. But if we don't see him on the field in week 1 versus North Carolina, that would be very detrimental for this Minnesota team moving forward. So let's talk about the depth chart. Let's talk about the guys who are behind Daniel Jackson, but we need to step up in this upcoming season. We're diving into that coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about our friends of the show in Ibotta, because Ibotta, look, they're the place to be when it comes to savings and saving you money. But at the same time, you've got, I believe it is Labor Day coming up. Is it Labor Day, Memorial Day? I always mix the two up. It is none other than Labor Day. So I'm going to get that right for you. But it is Labor Day coming up. And usually I like to hopefully find myself near a grill with some barbecue going on Labor Day. And it's time to stock up. You can stock up with your barbecue meats. You can get your coal. You can get gas if that's the type of grill you're running on, or whatever you need, the veggies, the snacks, the charcuterie, whatever you're going to go with. It is time to stock up and get it all. And right now, Ibotta can help you with that, because Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds, from groceries to beauty supplies to even toys. So if you got to get the bags going, you got to get the yard games going out, Ibotta can help you save money so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Now, the average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, or that flight you've been eyeing up, or a fancy dinner you've been craving. Save up special for a night out with your special someone. But overall, other apps give you points that don't amount to much. But with Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners at Locked On $5 just for trying out their app by using the code Locked On College when you register. So when you register on the free Ibotta app, just use promo code Locked On College when you register, and you'll get $5 credited to you. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta, that's IBOTTA app, to start earning cash back, and use promo code Locked On College. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use promo code Locked On College. Now, Gophers fans, the season is almost here, but it's almost football season for the NFL, college football, and more. So you're going to want to be sure to hit subscribe over on Locked On Minnesota Sports. We have a 24/7 streaming channel over that way as well, and you're not going to want to miss out. Last season we had done live post-game reactions. I'm sure we're going to get that going this year with myself, Ron Johnson, and others. So you're going to want to tap in. Be sure to hit subscribe over there. But let's break down the wide receiver depth chart for the Gophers heading into 2024. Now, this room holds the most questions, seemingly from all parties, from fans, from media, from opponents, from coaches, from Big Ten analysts. Everyone wants to know what is going on with this Gophers wide receiver room, because there's a lot of hope with this new quarterback, Max Brosmer. There's already a known factor with the running back room, with the transfers they brought in with Darius Taylor and you have 3 starters back from your offensive line and a lot of production beyond them, with a Greg Johnson who's seen time, with a Martez Lewis who's seen time, with Philip Daniels who's scrapping to potentially earn a job. A lot of experience on that O-line that is going to be critical. So it comes into play of how will the receivers shake out? Can they catch the ball to keep the passing game going? Now, when you're looking at this room, I think the QB play could truly make or break the offense, but I think the wide receivers is what is going to be the most important. We know we have O-line. We know we have running backs. The excitement is there for the quarterback. So it comes down to who do you have beyond your second team all Big Ten wide receiver in Daniel Jackson. Now, with Daniel Jackson, we just talked about him a bit, but we got to kick it off with the big dog. If fully healthy, I truly think nothing is stopping him from breaking 1,000 yards this season. And Minnesota hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver since 2019 when they had to. And then, like I said, there's only been 6 in the history of Gophers football. So if healthy, Jackson could etch his name into history and build a case for the NFL like we mentioned in segment 1. Now, the biggest question is beyond Daniel Jackson. Who can answer the call at the wide receiver 2 position? And here's my take on the targets. Overall, I think the first shot is going to be with the veterans. I think Elijah Spencer and Le'Meke Brockington are going to be the first guys you see on the field in the starter capacity with Daniel Jackson if he's healthy and in there in game 1. Now, Elijah Spencer last year only had 19 targets on the year, and a lot of that came later in the season. He started to come alive late in the year. He had 3 touchdowns late in the season, which is definitely helpful. And if he can show the chemistry with Brosmer early, he can get back on track this season. He is a guy who, yes, he's had some drops in the offseason, but I think people are focusing too hard on that and not looking at his overall play of work when it actually came to the bright lights being on. When he is in the actual game situations, he doesn't have a lot of drops credited to his name. So overall, I think we might be harping on that a bit too much for something that hasn't actually happened in real game time. So his sophomore year, though, with Charlotte is where you see the upside. You see the potential. He had 928 yards, 9 touchdowns. And if Elijah Spencer can come into this season playing like that guy, I think this room will be very capable with him as a number 2. But if it's not him, I think the next man up that they're looking at is Le'Meke Brockington. He has a ton of upside. He is strong as all get out. Like, this dude is just a beast when it comes to being able to take contact, be a powerful guy, and he is strong, especially in his base and his legs. Now, we have seen and heard about the potential. We all remember the game-winning touchdown with versus Wisconsin in 2022, and he's looking to bounce back from an injury from last year, but we haven't gotten to see him at a large capacity before. He could be the leader of the room beyond this upcoming season in 2024, or he could get passed up by some younger guys, and this year will be the biggest answer to that future question. So if it's not those 2, I think they'll get the first looks. But if they don't step up and answer the call, then it will be turning to some of the younger names next to see who's got next, not only this season, but moving forward into 2025 and beyond. Because the next 4 or 5 Gophers on this list are guys that are potentially redshirt freshmen or true freshmen, and I believe there's 1 redshirt sophomore of the next 5 up on this depth chart. Now, the next man up for me is Nuke Hayes. Everything I saw this summer, everything I saw in the spring, it was Nuke climbing up the depth chart and really impressing the staff overall. Now, like I said, Daniel Jackson has been missing some practices here in the fall, and Nuke Hayes is one of the guys who has really stepped up. He missed some in the spring too, and Nuke Hayes was a guy who stepped up. So overall, I think Nuke Hayes could be next up in that role that Daniel Jackson is playing. And I also think that means that Nuke Hayes could be one of the first guys to see himself rotated into the potential lineup, and one of the first young guys to get a live look on the field, possibly versus North Carolina. But if not versus North Carolina, I think definitely in that game number 2 against Rhode Island to see what he's got. Now, overall, Nuke Hayes is a shifty player. He could be a good yards after catch receiver, and I'm really excited by the talent he brings to the field. But he's not the only receiver that's younger that I'm intrigued by. You've heard me talk about Kenrick Lanier on this show time and time again. He's another player that has been touted since he early enrolled in spring of 2023, and I think Kenrick will get some looks this year. It just comes down to how many looks will he get, and I think that will be dependent on what he does with the opportunities that he's given, maybe early on in the season. Again, I think Rhode Island and Nevada are the first games that you look look at where maybe you'll start to see some of these young guys get rotated in. And if they can produce, maybe they will get more tick as the season goes on. Now, he may be my favorite of the group, but it is hard to definitively say that when we haven't seen any of these guys I've been talking about in live bright lights on Saturday nights. So I'm hoping for Kenrick Lanier, Nuke Hayes. I think those are the first two up beyond the veteran leaders in this receiver room. But there are three other names that I have to mention that could easily put themselves in that category. Tyler Williams is one of them, coming from Georgia, redshirt freshman, transferring in. He's got the size. He is taller than I imagined. Standing next to him on the sidelines in some of these fall practices, I was like, oh yeah, he's bigger than what I had initially thought he was going to be. And I think he's getting warmed up to the playbook and the system and the culture and everything like that. Now, he was one of the guys that traveled to Atlanta. I mean, he did play out in Georgia, so it makes sense, but with Max Brosmer and the crew. So overall, he's trying to get sped up as fast as he can into the system. We've seen him work with the twos a bit when it comes to the Gophers fall camp session so far, but he's a name to keep an eye on as far as who could be a next man up or who could maybe work into the rotation. Another one is TJ McWilliams. I've been seeing more and more of him in the fall. He's one of those guys that I think is more of a unique route runner. I think he likes to separate and have those intricacies. He likes to have quick feet and be able to separate and confuse or lose his defensive back in the release package. So overall, TJ McWilliams is another guy to keep in mind. Now, TJ McWilliams and Kenrick Lanier were both All-American Bowl players coming out of their senior year before they headed to college. So both of them have high upside and high touted talent from high school, and we'll hopefully be able to see that here in college, both of them being redshirt freshmen in this upcoming season. Now you go over to the next one, the last one of the five that I think are in that core rotation behind the three vets. I think it's Christian Driver. We've heard a bit about him. I think he is clearly running with the twos right now, but I think he could be a weapon in the slot receiver position this upcoming year. Christian Driver transferred in from Penn State. His father is Donald Driver, great Green Bay Packers legend. You know he has the intelligence and the field IQ, and now I've heard about the blips and the specialness that he has shown on the field, not only from PJ Fleck, but he said ask around, ask the guys in the room. And a lot of the guys have been impressed with Christian Driver. So I think he is a name you want to keep an eye on this season and could be a staple for this team moving forward. Now, those 8 receivers, those 8 that we just went through, first, Daniel Jackson, Elijah Spencer, Lemeke Brockington, the vets, as I call them, and then the next up, young guys, and Nuke Hayes, Kenrick Lanier, Tyler Williams, TJ McWilliams, and Christian Driver. I think those 8 receivers are probably the only receivers you will see on the field in a receiver capacity this upcoming season, in my opinion. Now, will all 8 get a fair shake and a fair amount of looks? Probably not, most likely not. But could 1 to 3 of these guys transfer if they're not given the opportunity? I think that is absolutely a possibility, which is why I hope the Gophers really try to get a good look at some of these young guys and truly rotate this wide receiver room and get a lot of snaps to a lot of folks, so we can see not only the talent that is there and we're hoping we can see moving forward, but also if these guys are the next man up in the players of the future, or if the Gophers will have to go hard in the portal and in the future recruiting classes moving forward. Now, my guess is you're going to want to see Nuke Hayes, Kenrick Lanier, TJ McWilliams, Tyler Williams, and see if they can be that dude. On top of that, with Christian Driver in a similar category, I think Daniel Jackson's going to get his, but everything beyond him is still up for grabs. And I think right now, as it sits, those 3 vets will be your starters, and then you'll have some combination. I think the next 2 up would be Nuke Hayes and Kenrick Lanier. I don't know who else would come in beyond them if it was like a group of 6. If I had to guess, I think it maybe is Christian Driver as a slot receiver, but time will tell. But that's what I've got my eyes on. Now, the best of the rest will probably contribute on special teams in some capacity, but you've got Christian Hoskins. I would love to see him as a returner. I've been saying that for years now, but we haven't seen it happen. Quentin Redding is our current returner, and he will likely be in a similar capacity. You've got Cade, the alumni son, but overall, he is a walk-on. I don't think we'll see him too much, but maybe in a special teams capacity. And then finally, you've got the only true freshman on the team this year, likely a redshirt, in Jalen Smith from Mankato. So I think overall, it's a deep room. It's a big unknown room, and it's going to be something the Gophers have to really find out more about this upcoming season. But the final thing we're doing today is breaking down the wide receiver room rankings across the entire Big Ten. That's what's coming up next. Gophers fans, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel, because you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's 3 weeks of free NFL Sunday Ticket from now through September 22nd. So if you time that out right, I'm saying you'll get a couple different weeks of some free NFL football of every single game every Sunday for a 3-week trial. So you're going to want to give that a tryout. Now then, with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. And again, if you bet $5, you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit fanduel.com today and give it a look. You can bet on the North Carolina game in week 1 where the Gophers are favored by 2.5 points. But again, I'm talking about the point total you should go to and smash the under on the 50.5. That's just my suggestion, but do what you got to do over at fanduel.com. FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On. All right, Gophers fans, this show is probably going to be a little bit longer because we're going to dive into the rankings for the wide receiver rooms across the entire Big Ten, but I'm going to try to fly through these. So coming in at #1, I've got Oregon. Tez Johnson has the most returning production from last year across the entire conference. Then you've got an extremely talented, athletic Evan Stewart coming from Texas A&M. Those two make up maybe the best duo in the Big Ten conference when it comes to wide receivers. But then they've got depth. You've got Gary Bryant Jr., you've got Trayshawn Holden, you've got a talented freshman from the last couple classes in Jurion Dickey, Dylan Gresham, and I think is Jeremiah McClellan. They've got a whole lot of talent and a team that loves to pass the ball. Plus, they've got their QB1 right now in Dylan Gabriel and QB of the future in Dante Moore. They are set up to pass the rock over and over for many years to come. They're my #1 room. You go to #2, I've got Ohio State. Emeka Egbuka has shown himself to be one of the best receivers in the country when healthy. Now, last year he was hurt. Prior to that, he had a 1,200-yard season, so he is a stud. Jeremiah Smith, true freshman. I think he could be a Marvin Harrison-type freak. I think he is truly going to be the #1 or #2 receiver on this Ohio State team. And then you've got Carnell Tate, who can hold his own. This may be the least experience for a trio in the Ohio State receiver room in a while, but it's also a ton of talent that is truly up there for some of the best of the best. Then you go to #3, I've got the USC Trojans. Now, this is a trio of young, talented, diverse skill sets, and that's why I have them in my top 3 in receiver rooms in the entire conference. You've got Zachariah Branch, who is like a Tyreek Hill fast, plus a lethal returner. You've got Deuce Robinson, who is a big body jump ball type guy who came in as a former tight end recruit, has transitioned to full-time receiver, and has made some production as a true freshman. And then you go to Mekhi Lemon, crisp route runner who is solid at separation. Not many programs can beat that group as a whole, so USC is #3. Now, #4, surprisingly for me, is Nebraska, and it's because they are building up in a way that we have seen Matt Rhule be successful with. They have built up with some speed and some athletes when it comes to Malachi Coleman and Jalen Lloyd. Now, on top of that, you add in receiver and a physical 6'4" transfer of Jamal Banks, and you've got a much better group for year 2 of Matt Rhule, who has found success with speed guys when he was at Baylor, especially, but also at Temple. You go to #5, I've got the Wisconsin Badgers. I think you could flip my 5 and 6 either way, and I wouldn't argue with you. Now, Wisconsin has Harding coming back. He's their #1 receiver with over 800 yards last year. They've got Bryson Green, a transfer from last offseason, coming back, and he was productive. I think he had 400 or 500 yards. You've got Tyrell Henry, a new transfer from Michigan State. You've got Joseph Griffin. I think he transferred him from Wake Forest. But overall, they have a lot of experience coming from transfers that could fit the system. They've been pretty particular about who they pick in that. And then they have an intriguing young guy in Kyan Barry Johnson. So this room has a lot of upside and more talented quarterback, which means they could have a more of a top 5 unit across the board. And I also wouldn't have a problem flopping them with our #6, who is Maryland. Now, the difference in the wide receiver room rankings between Maryland and Wisconsin for me comes down to quarterback play, which is why I put Wisconsin ahead, because I trust Tyler Van Dyke more than I do a Billy Edwards or an MJ Morris. Now, that being said, Maryland has two of their top three guys coming back in Ty Felton and Caden Prather, and that is a quality group to have. You move on to number 7. I've got UCLA because Michael Sturdivant is possibly one of the most dynamic wide receiver athletes in the conference that's not on Oregon, Ohio State, or USC. I think he could take a leap in the Eric Bieniemy system, and then you've got Logan Loya and a transfer in Rico Flores, so they got some quality guys at the top end of their depth chart, and there's a lot to like in that group. Number 8, I've got the Minnesota Gophers because Daniel Jackson is leading the helm. Now, if Elijah Spencer and Lemeki Brockton could step up and be true number 2 type guys, then maybe they can move up in these rankings. But Daniel Jackson carries a lot of the weight right now. There's also that potential upside from the youth, but you don't really know what you have because none of them have played. So Daniel Jackson, being an all Big Ten second team receiver who has been better in production every single year after year after year, earned the number 8 spot almost by himself. Now, Illinois, they've got Pat Bryant, who is a touchdown savant coming back. They also have a transfer coming in Zachary Franklin, who could be a perfect fit for that Isaiah Williams role. And this group had to be in my top 10, honestly. But you could make the case for them being ahead of Minnesota, but I think because of Daniel Jackson, I just don't see it. Then you go to number 10, and I've got Penn State. Now, this may be too low when you're talking about this new offensive coordinator who is one of the most explosive passing offenses over the last couple of years. But that being said, Penn State doesn't have any names that make this group elite. Now, Julian Fleming has the talent. He comes from Ohio State, but he doesn't have a ton of consistent production at Ohio State. On top of that, they lost their number 1 receiver to Auburn, and now there are a bunch of unknown names beyond that. So a lot of their receiving production over the years has come from the tight ends and the running backs. So I can't go too much higher than 10 with Penn State. You go to 11, I've got Rutgers. Similar to my next pick, I think there were 2 very intriguing transfers for this Rutgers team coming in. You've got Dymere Miller, who is an FCS all-star, and then on top of that, you have a former FCS stud in Nazim Brantley, and then you've got their returning leader in receiving production last year in Dramel, who is a sufficible player who led the room last year. So I think Rutgers has to be at least in the middle of the pack with some unknowns in how those transfers will carry over. Now, number 12, like I said, similar playing field. I've got Indiana, because Elijah Surratt, super intriguing. Donovan McCulley, super intriguing. And then Price is a speedster. Signetti is going to want to throw the ball, and they could finish higher than this, but I think 12 is a safe ranking for them, not knowing how things will shape up or take place and how they will ebb and flow in the first year of Signetti. You go to 13, I've got Purdue. Purdue has a lot of unknowns, but they also have 2 Georgia transfers coming in Denylon Morissette and CJ Smith, both coming from Georgia, which is intriguing young talent because both of them are going to be sophomores, I believe. But can they be full-time studs? That's the biggest question, so I couldn't put them higher than 13. 14, AJ Henning carries the way for Northwestern. He is the staple of the room, but I'm not sure they have the quarterbacks to keep him fed and difference-making. 15, you've got Michigan, a lot of unknowns in the wide receiver room, and most of last year's production is gone from the program. Plus, you have the unknowns of the quarterback, which makes it harder for me to rank this group any higher. 16, we go to Iowa. Caleb Brown is the number 1 receiver for sure, but aside from him, none of the others really instill any fear or any hope on this team, and that team already struggles to pass the ball, so I just couldn't get Iowa higher. 17 is Washington. I'm not going to lie to you, this group could be higher. I just believe that this group's one of the biggest unknowns in the entire conference after losing their top 4 or 5 options from last year's dynamic team. And then number 18, Michigan State. No one on the entire roster invokes confidence for me, and that is very concerning. So that is my wide receiver Big Ten rankings. That's going to do it for us on today's show. I appreciate you listening. Tomorrow we're going to talk tight ends, and then we're going to go to offensive line later this week. So be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube, and we're going to prep for North Carolina week next week. So I'll see you then as well. Roll the boat, Sky Umago Gophers, as always, and please don't forget to hit subscribe.